the boy God chose before the world could see it. Have you ever wondered why God allows good people to suffer? Why would God give someone an incredible dream only to let everything fall apart? Tonight, we begin one of the most powerful stories in the entire Bible, a story of betrayal, pain, faith, forgiveness, and God's perfect plan. This is the story of Joseph. Long before he became the ruler of Egypt, Joseph was simply a young shepherd living with his father Jacob and his 11 brothers in the land of Canaan. Joseph was not like the others. He was kind, thoughtful, obedient, and deeply devoted to God. His father Jacob loved him dearly because Joseph had been born in Jacob's old age. That special love, however, created a painful division within the family. Jacob gave Joseph a beautiful robe unlike anything his brothers had ever received. It was colorful, expensive, and unmistakably a symbol of honor. Every time Joseph wore that robe, his brothers were reminded that their father loved Joseph more than them. Day after day, jealousy grew inside their hearts. What began as hurt slowly turned into bitterness, and bitterness eventually became hatred. The Bible tells us they could not even speak peacefully to Joseph. But God was already working behind the scenes. One night, Joseph had a dream. In the dream, he and his brothers were tying bundles of grain in a field. Suddenly, Joseph's bundle stood upright, while the bundles belonging to his brothers bowed before it. Joseph didn't understand everything the dream meant, but he believed it came from God. Excited, he shared it with his family. Instead of celebrating, his brothers became furious. "So you think one day we'll bow down to you?" Their anger burned even hotter. Soon Joseph had another dream. This time the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowed before him. Even Jacob wondered about its meaning. But deep inside, he remembered the dream. Joseph didn't realize it then, but God was revealing the future, not to make Joseph proud, but to prepare him for a purpose far greater than he could imagine. Many people misunderstand God's promises. They think that once God gives a dream, life immediately becomes easy. But throughout the Bible, God's promises often come before life's greatest battles. David was anointed king before running for his life. Moses was called by God before facing Pharaoh. And Joseph received his dreams before entering years of unimaginable suffering. One ordinary morning, Jacob asked Joseph to check on his brothers, who were tending sheep many miles away. Joseph immediately obeyed. Wearing his special robe, he walked across hills and valleys, searching for them. When the brothers saw Joseph coming from a distance, hatred filled their hearts. "There comes the dreamer," they said. "Let's kill him." Imagine those words. The people who should have protected Joseph were now planning his death. Jealousy had completely blinded them. One brother, Reuben, stepped forward. He didn't want Joseph murdered. Instead, he convinced the others to throw Joseph into an empty pit. His plan was to secretly rescue Joseph later. As Joseph reached them, they grabbed him violently. They ripped off his beautiful robe. The robe that represented his father's love now lay in the dirt. Joseph cried, he pleaded, he begged his brothers to stop. But no one listened. They threw him into a deep, empty cistern, cold, dark, alone. Above him, his brothers calmly sat down to eat a meal, as if nothing had happened. Can you imagine Joseph looking upward, hearing laughter while he cried for help? Perhaps he wondered, "God, what happened to my dream?" Sometimes life feels exactly like that. God gives us hope. Then suddenly everything seems to fall apart. But what Joseph could not see was that heaven had not forgotten him. God was still writing the story. As the brothers ate, a caravan of traders traveling toward Egypt appeared in the distance. Judah suddenly had an idea. Why kill him? Let's sell him. For 20 pieces of silver, Joseph was sold as a slave, bound with ropes, taken away from his home, separated from his father. His future seemed destroyed. The brothers dipped Joseph's colorful robe into goat's blood and carried it back to Jacob. When Jacob saw it, his heart shattered. He believed a wild animal had killed his beloved son. For days he wept. No one could comfort him. Meanwhile, Joseph was carried farther and farther away toward Egypt. Everything he had ever known disappeared behind him. His family, his home, his freedom, his dreams. Or so it seemed, because God's promises are never cancelled by human betrayal. The same God who gave Joseph the dream was walking beside him into Egypt. Joseph didn't know where the road would lead. He couldn't see the palace. He couldn't see the throne. He couldn't see the future. But God could. Every painful step was leading Joseph exactly where God wanted him to be. And sometimes, the road to your destiny begins with a season that feels like defeat. Joseph's greatest miracle did not begin in a palace. It began inside a pit, and what looked like the end was only the beginning. The caravan traveled for days across endless deserts. Each step carried Joseph farther from the only home he had ever known. The familiar hills of Canaan disappeared behind him, replaced by the towering cities and mighty temples of Egypt. Joseph was no longer a beloved son. He was now a slave. To the people around him, he was just another young man to be bought and sold. But heaven saw something completely different. God still called him chosen. When the traders reached Egypt, Joseph stood among other slaves, waiting to be purchased. Men examined the captives as if they were animals. Some looked at their strength. Others judged their age. Joseph had no control over what would happen next. Yet the God who had given him dreams was still directing every step. Soon an important Egyptian official approached. His name was Potiphar. He served Pharaoh as captain of the royal guard, one of the highest positions in the kingdom. Potiphar purchased Joseph and brought him into his household. To most people, this looked like another tragedy. But in reality, God was placing Joseph exactly where he needed to be. Joseph could have become bitter. He could have complained every day. He could have blamed God for everything that had happened. Instead, he made a different choice. He decided that even as a slave, he would serve with excellence. Every task he received, he completed faithfully. Whether it was cleaning the house, caring for animals, managing supplies, or helping other servants, Joseph gave his best. He worked with honesty. He spoke with kindness. He refused to let pain define his character. The Bible says something remarkable. The Lord was with Joseph. Notice that it does not say Joseph's life became easy. It says God was with him. God's presence is more valuable than perfect circumstances. Day after day, Potiphar noted something unusual. Everything Joseph touched seemed to prosper. The crops flourished. The servants worked better together. The household became more successful. Even the finances improved. Potiphar realized there was something different about this young Hebrew. He began trusting Joseph with greater responsibilities. Soon Joseph was no longer doing ordinary chores. He was managing the entire estate. Every servant answered to him. Every decision passed through him. Potiphar trusted Joseph so completely that he no longer worried about anything except the food placed before him. Think about how incredible this is. Only a few years earlier, Joseph had been thrown into a pit by his own brothers. Now, he had become the most trusted servant in one of Egypt's most powerful homes. God had not forgotten his promise. Even in slavery, God was preparing Joseph for leadership. Leadership begins long before people recognize it. Joseph learned to lead while serving. He learned responsibility before receiving authority. He learned humility before receiving honor. These lessons would one day prepare him to govern an entire nation. As time passed, Joseph grew into a strong, wise, and handsome young man. His character matched his appearance. People respected him because he consistently chose what was right. But whenever God begins lifting someone higher, new challenges often appear. Inside Potiphar's house lived someone whose heart was far from God. Potiphar's wife began noticing Joseph. At first, she simply admired him. Soon admiration became desire. Day after day, she tried to persuade Joseph to betray his master. "Come and be with me," she whispered. No one would know. No one would see. But Joseph knew someone would always see. God. He answered with courage. "My master trusts me with everything in this house. He has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" Notice Joseph's words. He didn't only say it would betray Potiphar. He said it would be a sin against God. His relationship with God mattered more than temporary pleasure. Every day she continued asking. Every day Joseph refused. Sometimes the greatest victories are not dramatic battles. Sometimes they are quiet decisions made over and over again. One day the house became unusually quiet. Most of the servants were away. Joseph entered the house to complete his work. Potiphar's wife saw her opportunity. She grabbed Joseph by his robe. "Stay with me," she demanded. For a brief moment, Joseph faced a choice. Protect his reputation or protect his integrity. He chose integrity. Joseph pulled away and ran from the house, leaving his robe behind in her hands. He escaped temptation, but his obedience came with a painful cost. Humiliated and angry, Potiphar's wife screamed for the servants. Holding Joseph's robe, she invented a terrible lie. She claimed Joseph had attacked her. When Potiphar returned home, she repeated the accusation with tears and convincing words. The evidence seemed undeniable. Joseph's robe was in her hands. Potiphar became furious. Without a fair trial, without asking Joseph for the full story, Joseph was arrested. The trusted servant who had done everything right was suddenly treated like a criminal. Chains replaced responsibility. A prison cell replaced a comfortable home. Imagine Joseph sitting alone behind cold stone walls. He had resisted temptation. He had honored God. He had remained faithful. And now he was in prison. Many people would ask, why does God allow this? Joseph probably had the same question. But sometimes God is doing his greatest work in places we would never choose. The prison was not the end of Joseph's story. It was the next chapter in God's perfect plan. The same God who was with Joseph in the pit, the same God who was with Joseph in Potiphar's house, would also be with Joseph inside the prison, because God's presence is never limited by our location. You may lose your position. You may lose your comfort. You may even lose the approval of people. But if God is with you, your future is still secure. Joseph did not know it yet. But inside that prison, he was about to meet two men whose dreams would change his life forever. And through those dreams, God would begin opening the door that no human being could ever close. Forgotten by men, remembered by God. The heavy prison door slammed shut. Its echo rolled through the stone walls like a final sentence. Joseph stood in silence. Only a few years earlier, he had been his father's beloved son. Then he became a slave. Now he was a prisoner. Every step of his journey seemed to move farther away from the dreams God had given him. Have you ever felt that way? Have you ever prayed, obeyed God, tried to do what was right, only to find yourself in an even harder place? If Joseph had measured God's faithfulness by his circumstances, he might have given up. But Joseph chose something different. He trusted God's character, even when he couldn't understand God's plan. The prison was dark, cold, and filled with men who had lost hope. Some were guilty. Others claimed they were innocent. Every face carried a story. Every heart carried pain. Joseph could have become bitter. Instead, he became a servant once again. He treated the prisoners with kindness. He respected the guards. He worked faithfully even though no one was watching. And just as before, something extraordinary happened. The Bible says the Lord was with Joseph. Wherever Joseph went, God's favor followed him. Soon the prison warden noticed him. He saw Joseph's honesty, wisdom, and reliability. Before long, Joseph was placed in charge of many responsibilities inside the prison. The warden trusted him completely. It seemed impossible. Even behind bars, Joseph became a leader. This was another lesson God was teaching him. Your calling is not determined by your location. You can serve God in a palace. You can serve God in a prison. God's purpose follows those who remain faithful. Time passed. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Months became years. Joseph waited. No rescue came. No family member arrived. No explanation was given. Still, he remained faithful. Then one day, 2 new prisoners entered. They were not ordinary men. One had served as Pharaoh's chief cupbearer. The other had been Pharaoh's chief baker. Both had offended the king in ways the Bible does not explain. Now they sat in prison, uncertain whether they would ever leave alive. One morning, Joseph noticed something unusual. Both men looked deeply troubled. He approached them gently. "Why do you look so sad today?" No one had asked them that question before. Sometimes the greatest act of kindness is simply noticing another person's pain. The cupbearer answered first. "We both had dreams last night, but there is no one to explain what they mean." Joseph immediately pointed their attention toward God. "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." The cupbearer began. "In my dream, I saw a vine with 3 branches. The branches budded, blossomed, and produced ripe grapes. I took the grapes, squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and placed the cup back into his hand." Joseph listened carefully. Then he smiled. This is what God is saying. The 3 branches represent 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will restore you to your position. You will once again serve the king. Hope filled the cupbearer's eyes. Before he left, Joseph made one simple request. "When everything goes well for you, please remember me. Tell Pharaoh about me. I have done nothing deserving of this prison." The baker watched with excitement. If the first dream brought good news, surely his would as well. He eagerly shared his dream. "I had 3 baskets of bread on my head. The top basket contained food prepared for Pharaoh, but birds came and ate everything from the basket." Joseph's expression changed. The message was not the same. He spoke honestly, even though it was difficult. The 3 baskets also represent 3 days. But within 3 days, Pharaoh will execute you, and the birds will feed on your body. It was heartbreaking. Yet Joseph refused to change God's message just to make someone feel better. True servants of God speak truth with compassion. Exactly 3 days later, Pharaoh celebrated his birthday. He ordered both prisoners to be brought before him, just as Joseph had said. The cupbearer was restored. The baker was executed. Everything happened exactly as God had revealed. Surely now Joseph's suffering would end. Surely the cupbearer would remember the young Hebrew who had given him hope. Surely freedom was only days away. But days passed, then weeks, then months, then years. The Bible records one of the saddest verses in Joseph's story. The chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. Forgotten. After everything Joseph had done. The one man who could help him never spoke his name. Can you imagine how painful that must have been? Every morning, Joseph may have looked toward the prison gate. Maybe today. Maybe someone is coming. Maybe Pharaoh knows. But no one came. 2 full years passed, 2 years of waiting, 2 years of silence, 2 years when it seemed as though heaven had forgotten him. But God had not forgotten. Sometimes what feels like God's delay is actually God's perfect timing. If Joseph had been released earlier, he might have returned to Canaan. He never would have stood before Pharaoh. He never would have become governor of Egypt. He never would have saved countless lives, including his own family. God wasn't saying no, God was saying not yet. Behind the scenes, heaven was preparing the exact moment when Joseph's life would change forever. A moment no human being could create. A moment only God could arrange. Far away in the royal palace, the most powerful man in Egypt was about to experience 2 mysterious dreams. Dreams so disturbing that none of Egypt's wisest men would be able to explain them. And at that very moment, someone would finally remember a forgotten prisoner named Joseph. The prison door had not opened yet. But God's appointed time had finally arrived. For 2 long years, Joseph remained in prison. Every sunrise looked the same. Every sunset ended behind cold stone walls. Nothing seemed to change. But while Joseph waited, God was preparing a miracle that would happen in a single day. One night, Pharaoh, the most powerful ruler in Egypt, went to sleep as usual. But before morning came, he had 2 dreams that shook him to his core. In the first dream, Pharaoh stood beside the Nile River. Out of the water came 7 beautiful, healthy cows. They grazed peacefully along the riverbank. Then something strange happened. 7 more cows emerged from the Nile. These cows were thin, weak, and frightening to look at. To Pharaoh's horror, the thin cows swallowed the 7 healthy cows. Yet after eating them, they remained just as thin as before. Pharaoh suddenly woke up. His heart was racing. The dream felt real. He tried to calm himself and eventually fell asleep again. But another dream came. This time he saw 7 full, healthy heads of grain growing on one stalk. Then 7 thin, scorched heads of grain appeared. The thin grain swallowed the healthy grain. Pharaoh woke again. He knew these dreams carried a message. The next morning he called every magician, wise man, and advisor in Egypt. One by one they listened. One by one they failed. No one could explain the dreams. The palace was filled with confusion. At that very moment, the chief cupbearer suddenly remembered. His face changed. A forgotten memory rushed back. He stepped before Pharaoh. "My lord, today I remember my mistake. When I was in prison, there was a young Hebrew servant. We both had dreams. He interpreted them, and everything happened exactly as he said. Pharaoh wasted no time. Bring him to me." Far away in the prison, a guard rushed toward Joseph's cell. "Joseph, the king is calling for you." Imagine that moment. For years, Joseph had stared at prison walls. Now the palace doors were opening. The chains were removed. He bathed. His beard was shaved. He was given clean clothes. Within hours, the prisoner stood before the king of Egypt. What an incredible reminder that God can change your life in a single day. The same morning that began inside a prison would end inside a palace. Pharaoh looked directly at Joseph. "I have heard that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it." Joseph could have taken the credit. He could have used this opportunity to impress the king. Instead, he humbly replied, "I cannot do it." But God will give Pharaoh the answer. Even after years of suffering, Joseph still pointed people toward God. Pharaoh described both dreams in detail. Joseph listened carefully. Then God's wisdom filled his heart. "The two dreams have the same meaning," Joseph said. "The 7 healthy cows and the 7 healthy heads of grain represent 7 years of great abundance. The 7 thin cows and the 7 thin heads of grain represent 7 years of severe famine." God is showing Pharaoh what is about to happen. There will be 7 years when Egypt produces more food than ever before. But after that, 7 terrible years of famine will come. The famine will be so severe that people will forget the years of abundance. Joseph paused. Then he boldly gave advice. "Choose a wise and discerning man. Store grain during the 7 good years. When the famine comes, Egypt will have enough food." The palace fell silent. Every official looked at Pharaoh. No one had ever explained the dreams so clearly. No one had offered such wisdom. Pharaoh recognized something extraordinary. He said, "Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom the Spirit of God lives?" Then Pharaoh turned toward Joseph. "You shall be in charge of my palace. All my people will obey your commands. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you." In one incredible moment, Joseph went from prisoner to governor of Egypt. Pharaoh removed his royal signet ring and placed it on Joseph's hand. He dressed Joseph in fine linen. He placed a gold chain around his neck. Joseph rode through the streets in Pharaoh's second royal chariot. People bowed before him as he passed. Years earlier, Joseph had dreamed that others would bow before him. Now, God's promise was beginning to unfold. Not because Joseph forced it, not because he sought power, but because God keeps his promises. Joseph was 30 years old. 13 difficult years had passed since his brothers sold him into slavery. 13 years of waiting. 13 years of disappointment. 13 years of trusting God. And every painful season had prepared him for this very day. Joseph immediately began his work. He traveled throughout Egypt. He organized storehouses in every major city. During the 7 years of abundance, farmers harvested more grain than anyone could count. Joseph stored food until it became impossible to measure. Many people laughed at the plan. They believed the good times would never end. But Joseph trusted God's warning. Exactly 7 years later, everything changed. The rain stopped. The fields dried up. Crops failed across the land. The famine spread beyond Egypt into surrounding nations. Soon people became desperate. Families had no food. Children cried from hunger. Neighboring kingdoms faced disaster. But Egypt had prepared, because one faithful servant had listened to God. People from every direction traveled to Egypt to buy grain. Long lines formed outside the storehouses, day after day. Joseph watched thousands come seeking food. Little did he know, Among those travelers were 10 familiar faces, 10 brothers, who had once thrown him into a pit. The dreams God had given Joseph as a teenager were about to come true completely. The greatest reunion in the Bible was only days away, and Joseph would soon face the hardest choice of his life. Would he choose revenge or forgiveness? The answer would reveal the true greatness of the man God had shaped through years of suffering. The room was silent. Joseph's brothers stood frozen in fear. Their hearts pounded. The governor of Egypt, the second most powerful man in the world, was not a stranger. He was Joseph, the brother they had betrayed, the brother they had sold for 20 pieces of silver, the brother they believed they would never see again. No one spoke. No one moved. The weight of guilt they had carried for years suddenly became real. Joseph saw the fear in their eyes. He understood exactly what they were thinking. They expected revenge. They expected judgment. They expected the same pain they had once caused him. Instead, Joseph stepped closer. His voice was gentle. "Please, come near me." Slowly, the brothers approached. Joseph looked into each of their faces. They had all grown older. Time had changed their appearance, but he still recognized every one of them. With tears streaming down his face, Joseph said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt." The brothers lowered their heads. Shame filled the room. But Joseph continued, "Do not be afraid. Do not be angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me ahead of you to preserve life." Those words changed everything. Joseph did not deny what they had done. He did not pretend the betrayal never happened. Instead, he chose to see God's hand working through even the darkest moments. Then Joseph spoke one of the greatest truths found anywhere in Scripture. "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good." In a single sentence, Joseph revealed the heart of God's providence. People can make evil choices. They are responsible for those choices, yet God is so powerful that he can bring good even out of human sin. Joseph's suffering had never been meaningless. The pit had a purpose. The slavery had a purpose. The prison had a purpose. Every painful chapter had prepared him to save thousands of lives during the famine. Joseph embraced each of his brothers. They cried together. Years of guilt, years of sorrow, years of separation were washed away by forgiveness. The family was finally reunited. Joseph quickly gave them wonderful news. "Return to our father. Tell him I am alive. Bring him here to Egypt. There is still famine ahead, but I will provide for all of you." When Pharaoh heard what had happened, he welcomed Joseph's family with generosity. He sent wagons, supplies, and gifts for the long journey back to Canaan. The brothers hurried home. As they approached, Jacob saw them returning. His heart was heavy. He had spent more than 20 years believing Joseph was dead. The brothers spoke carefully. "Father, Joseph is alive." Jacob could not believe them. It seemed impossible. But then he saw the wagons Pharaoh had sent. Hope returned to his heart. Tears filled his eyes. "My son is alive. I will go and see him before I die." The journey to Egypt was long. Jacob was now an old man. Every mile carried him closer to the son he had mourned for decades. When Joseph heard his father was near, he immediately prepared his chariot. He could not wait another moment. As the two finally saw each other in the distance, Joseph ran forward. He threw his arms around his father. They held one another tightly. Neither wanted to let go. Years of sorrow disappeared in a flood of tears. Jacob whispered, "Now I am ready to die." since I have seen your face again." It was one of the most beautiful reunions in the entire Bible. Joseph settled his family in the rich land of Goshen. They had food, they had safety, they had peace. Everything God had promised was coming to pass. Years later, Jacob died after blessing each of his sons. Once again, fear entered the hearts of Joseph's brothers. Without their father alive, they wondered if Joseph would finally seek revenge. They came before him and bowed. "Please forgive us." Joseph began to weep. Even after all these years, they still did not fully understand his heart. He answered with compassion, "Do not be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your children." Joseph comforted them with kindness. He chose mercy over bitterness, love over revenge, faith over anger. Joseph lived a long life in Egypt. He watched his children and grandchildren grow. Before he died, he reminded his family of God's promise. "One day, God will surely come to help you. When he does, carry my bones with you." Joseph never stopped believing God's promises. Even at the end of his life, his faith looked beyond Egypt toward the future God had prepared. His story did not end with betrayal. It ended with hope, and his life still speaks to us today. Perhaps you feel like Joseph. Maybe someone has betrayed you. Maybe life has been unfair. Maybe you've been waiting for God to answer your prayers. Remember Joseph. God had not forgotten him in the pit. God had not forgotten him in slavery. God had not forgotten him in prison. And God has not forgotten you. Sometimes God's greatest blessings are being prepared during our longest seasons of waiting. Your pain is not the end of your story. Your disappointment is not the final chapter. If you remain faithful, God can turn what others meant for evil into something beautiful. Joseph's life points us to an even greater Savior. Just as Joseph was rejected by his brothers, yet became the one who saved them, Jesus Christ was rejected by many people. Yet through him, God offers salvation to the whole world. Joseph forgave those who hurt him. Jesus went even further. As he hung on the cross, he prayed, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." That is the heart of God, a heart full of mercy, a heart full of grace, a heart that never stops pursuing his children. So wherever you are today, trust God's timing. Remain faithful in every season. Choose forgiveness over revenge. Walk with God even when the path is difficult, because the same God who guided Joseph through every trial is still working today, and he is able to write a beautiful ending to every life that is placed in his hands. The end.